So we have our guest with us here today. Thank you so much. He's been with us before. I'm so glad he's come back again. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, Mad Max Blumenthal. How you doing,
audio
Mad Max?
capture not registered.
Enjoying a LaCroix.
Oh, so are we.
So are we.
I don't feel as bad now.
Or is it LaCroix? Which is it?
La Croix.
You're canceled. That's not what
LaCroix
a
X,
socialist would do, by the way. That's so I just right off the bat, Max, I just want your reaction because you went to DC. You asked Cori Bush some tough questions. He also called somebody what did you call him?
He said, "You punk bitch, boot licking." That's when I told you he was Mad Max. You see what he said?
Well, these guys tried to clown me, and they were taking selfies. They were these little dorky congressional staffers who were taking selfies with Adam Schiff, like the ultimate warmonger in Congress. And then they came up to me and were like, "Thank you for obfuscating the Uyghur genocide." And I'm like, yeah, oh, you really care about human rights. You're taking selfies with Adam Schiff. You're working in the institution that signs away so many lives, that is filled with administrative criminals who authorize sanctions across the world. And you're accusing me of being human rights criminal. I mean, so I've just pointed that out to them. I mean, it was kind of infuriating.
Right. So you
and
also
that was their video. Sorry to interrupt, but that was their video they posted that they thought would embarrass me. That's kind of been making.
Oh, I didn't know that. That was their video.
Yeah.
I thought that was your video.
I just thought it was funny the way TYT made sure they used that little snippet to kind of try to go after you. Like, look how distasteful Mad Max is being over here. Like, they purposely used that clip because somebody did take it down. Like the next day, I couldn't find it online. So
that was the staffers who tried to embarrass me, and basically like the whole over half the crowd, maybe over 75% on the steps were congressional staffers that the squad brought because they don't they're not really mobilizing a mass movement, but they posted that, then they removed it when they realized it didn't, like I actually
SWB audio capture not registered.
And they appreciated that I was pissed off. And so Anna Kasparian tries to embarrass me with it, like I'm going to be embarrassed by that. And she said the gray zone, which is notorious for deceptively editing video. But then she doesn't say what video was deceptively edited because we've never deceptively edited any video. So her little rant about me, I mean, I barely even, I responded to it in 2 tweets. I'm not going to play into like this sad battle of YouTube personalities that are devoid of any issues. And I think, everyone has this feeling right now that they've never watched TYT, don't even know it exists. And the only time they ever see it is when Anna Kasparian has a meltdown.
Right. They do this for attention. And I just wanted your reaction too, because you asked Cori Bush questions. Also Frank Analysis, Franco from there went and caught AOC in a moment. And Johnny, you have his video in the background, but the Supreme Court, of course, has blocked the eviction moratorium with a 6-3 vote. So what, like, how a lot of people were saying this was like a PR stunt, that this was theatrics. What are your comments on now in hindsight as to what's happened today or in the last 24 hours?
Well, we knew this was going to happen. The strategy was marketed somewhat deceptively by AOC. She said, we're not going to play nice. She gathered the crowd around. So we're not going to play nice. We're going to get it in people's faces and make them uncomfortable. And what we want to do is force everyone to come back here and put their name on this bill to kick everyone out of their homes and shame them. She didn't, those aren't her exact words, but she did say we want everyone to come back and reconvene. So she's basically saying we need to force the vote, which is obviously highly hypocritical. And then Chuck Schumer comes down, Adam Schiff comes down, and some of the other more mainstream Democrats come down to show their support. And the strategy suddenly changes to, let's just get the CDC to issue a highly conditional and temporary freeze on the eviction moratorium and kick it back to the Supreme Court, which is controlled by far-right Republicans who are tools of industry. And so we always knew this was coming. And then what they proceed to do, and where the photo op part comes in, the part that you criticize, is that they declared victory and made their followers online think that they actually spared millions of people from eviction, when what they did at best was buy them a few more weeks before the ravages of the free market took hold. So that declaration of victory with all the, we did it, I can't believe it, and all Cori Bush's selfies and everything, it created a false sense of hope and cleared the Capitol steps and terminated whatever movement was building. And I also have some criticism for like organized groups, socialist groups that can mobilize large numbers of people. They don't really have a right to criticize because they showed up. Some of them may have showed up late in the game and deserve credit for that. But it was an opportunity for so many people with more far-reaching demands, like cancel the rent, to come in and really start to take over the messaging. But they really let AOC and Cori Bush define the messaging and the strategy, which was doomed from the beginning.
I got to tip my hat off to you because I was texting you at that time going, wow, Max, great work. And I was texting Franco, but you were really trying to seize that moment. You're like, this is an opportunity. We need to get our asses to the Capitol now and build upon this to get a rent cancellation going. And, we talked about it on the show before, too, as well. With the CARES Act, while they were kicking trillions upstairs, that was the time right there to plant their flag again, the progressives, and say, we need rent cancellation. They didn't do it. And I'm glad you really tried to seize the moment. I can understand the criticisms towards those groups, because if people really cared, they would have got their ass to the steps and say, let's cancel the rent now instead of kicking the can down the road. So had it tipped off to you.
I think, there may be some organized kind of groups that are connected to the squad in the Democratic Party that are going to go protest at the Supreme Court, but it's going to end the same way. And what's needed now is direct action around these evictions. We've seen it before, and it's happening in cities. It's happening in LA. Yeah. People actually getting in the way of evictions, defending families. And, I don't want to get into, issues that can't be discussed on YouTube, but why are so many people facing eviction right now? Could it be because lockdown policy destroyed their income and wreck the economy? And if they do turn homeless, that could result in that kind of excess death that people who sleep on the streets typically experience within 5 to 7 years. So we're talking about lockdown policy potentially leading to excess death. And to talk about that, to say that, is still, it's totally forbidden within most left circles, but this is just obvious, staring us in the face. And so people will be like, they're throwing them out in the middle of a pandemic, but that's because of policy choices we made. Yeah.
Let's get a little bit more into Afghanistan, since this is one of your great areas, because they're saying now the new ISIS-K, or the Islamic State, I believe you say Khorasan. I don't know. I thought it was Khaleesi or something, but they're the group that attacked Kabul. But we were just talking about the former president of Afghanistan, Karzai. He called ISIS-K a tool of the U.S. Even reports from Russians saying that they saw U.S. helicopters supplying ISIS-K and other terrorist groups. In your opinion, who's more likely involved? I mean, it seems to be that intelligence is involved, but who else?
Well, I got to say, I can't just claim that there's a U.S. intelligence or deposed Afghan government connection to this attack, even if it benefits them, because the Taliban was calling out the imminent attack. They said this is going to happen. The Taliban is a mortal enemy of ISIS-K, ISIS Khorasan, and of the Afghan government that it replaced and destroyed. And they would have called out that intelligence connection if they thought it was there, and they haven't so far. Maybe that's because they're partnering with the U.S. to clear the airport. But what we can say decisively is that ISIS-K has always served the agenda of hawks in the Pentagon and of the Afghan and of elements of the Afghan government. It started out as the Pakistani Taliban around 2010. And their most spectacular attack was highly unusual because they actually recruited a CIA asset to carry it out at Camp Chapman to do a bombing of U.S. troops. So they were able to connect with CIA assets. Their main objective was to drive the U.S. out of the region. They were completely a byproduct of the U.S. occupation and invasion. They were largely responsible for a wave of terror attacks inside Pakistan, which the Pakistani ISI seems to regard as connected to the Afghan government or U.S. intelligence. We know U.S. intelligence has this very tense relationship with the Pakistani ISI because they've been supporting the Taliban inside Afghanistan. And Hamid Karzai made those comments that they always serve the U.S. agenda. When did he make those comments? It was April 2017, after the U.S. basically, Trump didn't even authorize it. It was Nicholson, the CENTCOM commander. He just let his Pentagon generals do whatever they want. And they decided to drop the mother of all bombs in eastern Afghanistan in the Nangarhar province, which is an area where ISIS-K has had some bases. And it seemed like they were just looking for the opportunity to test this weapon and send a message. And so in order to test the weapon, they had the perfect group to justify it. And it was a major violation of sovereignty for Afghanistan. It wasn't something that the Afghan government was seeking to do necessarily. So Karzai made those comments, and I think we can see now, like with the former CIA director Leon Panetta saying we have to go back in, and the whole Beltway media crowing that the U.S. military can't let this stay. The Pentagon suggesting they're going to wage standoff attacks, cruise missiles and maybe more MOABs. So ISIS-K continues to enjoy this symbiotic relationship with the Pentagon and hawkish elements in the Beltway.
Yeah, and just along those lines, when this whole thing was happening in Afghanistan, and I think you've talked about it in your recent stream with Ben Norton, do you think there was any type of closed deal, behind closed doors deal with the U.S. and the Taliban? What might have, like, the United States gotten away or gotten in return for leaving these military weapons just lying around with this hardware as they were withdrawing? Could it have been opium, lithium?
I mean, it could have also been the recognition that if the Taliban does not secure Afghanistan and impose its will on much of the country, that it's going to become a Star Wars bar for foreign extremists, and that they maybe like there was a rational reason. I don't know if the U.S. necessarily wants to see Afghanistan totally destabilized now as it was during the 1990s after the Red Army left. And then all the CIA assets, the warlords had this war of the warlords for Kabul. It's not clear to me the U.S. wants to see that happen right now. Certainly Russia and China don't. So giving them those weapons, essentially letting them take the weapons, it gives them firepower. And the Taliban killed most of ISIS-K in a series of battles in 2019. The ISIS-K is now headed actually not by an Afghan, but by an Arab who goes by the name Shahab al-Muhajir. And his job basically is to recruit people from around the world to come and turn Afghanistan into like the jihadist Las Vegas. So that's the issue, I think, right now. The opium thing, we saw so many drug dealers in the Afghan government. The Taliban has pledged to crack down. In the 1990s, they did crack down substantially on opium, which is why the U.S. actually, the Clinton administration basically supported them for that reason. But opium has proved profitable. It flooded the U.S. and now it's become a boon for big pharma and the Sackler family. That's how they got everyone on fentanyl, isn't it?
Yeah. Eventually, it was most of the people in the United States who took opioids for the first time got it from a doctor. You were talking about some of these leaders right now. The gentleman who's going to be the ISIS-K leader, seems like the 2020 version of Osama bin Laden now, coming over to Afghanistan and recruit. But we see a lot of people going, oh my God, how can we leave the people? It's awful. And then you had also mentioned some of these Mujahideen leaders back in the days. How bad were these warlords of the Mujahideen and some of these people involved in the Mujahideen when the Russian occupation began and we were supporting them with military-grade Stinger missiles and everything? How awful were they?
Well, a lot of people don't realize that the US began supporting these figures well before the Soviet Union was ever involved militarily in Afghanistan. And it was during the 1970s when there was a major power struggle between the secular camp, the Marxist camp, and the Islamist camp in Kabul. And it centered around Kabul University. So the US, through a series of CIA front groups, started backing what they called the professors. And these were figures like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and Burhanuddin Rabbani, who were professors at Kabul University of Islamic Studies and were going around campus organizing mobs to throw acid on the faces of women who did not wear hijab, who didn't cover. They were far-right extremists that the CIA chose to support. Because why? You don't want Marxists to take over Afghanistan. And there was a serious threat that actually took hold when the government of Mohammad Najibullah came to power and the Soviet Union backed the government. So the US basically gave these figures that they had a long-standing relationship with weapons. Billions of dollars went to Hekmatyar. This was a character who was carrying out car bombs in civilian areas all around Kabul. Friend of mine, a journalist friend of mine, Leslie Coburn, actually had her interpreter beheaded by Hekmatyar's men. Rabbani was another disgustingly violent figure. You had Jalaluddin Haqqani, whose son is behind the Haqqani group, which is an ally of the Taliban. He was getting at least $1 billion from the CIA. Then you had Ahmed Shah Massoud, who is the hero of the CIA. They thought he was like the moderate rebel. And basically, after the Soviet Union was driven out, all of these characters started fighting over Kabul, and they destroyed at least half the city. The government was basically sold off to the highest bidder, meaning Pakistan's intelligence services. The Saudi Arabia was trying to get skin in the game. The Afghan National Army was basically shipped over the border to Pakistan. I actually interviewed one of the few government functionaries who continued showing up to work in a suit throughout this period. And he described it to me in my book, The Management of Savagery, just what it was like watching his entire country just be stripped to the bone by these psychopaths that the CIA had recruited. So basically, it took the Taliban rolling in these Datsun Technicals that were given to them with Saudi money, shipped in on C-130 transports, U.S. military transports, along with advanced telecommunications equipment to sweep into Kabul and restore order. And they were welcomed by the people because they just wanted someone to act with a heavy hand and stabilize the country. Now, the Taliban had no money. They had the Saudi connection, right? But the country was destroyed. So where does the money come from? It comes through Osama bin Laden, the son of Saudi Arabia, a hero to people across the Gulf for his role in the anti-Soviet jihad. And he's given a little bit their version of a hotel. They eventually move him to like Kandahar because they are uncomfortable with his presence. They don't like what he's doing. They don't like Al-Qaeda and its international jihadist mentality, but they needed the money. And so that is what ultimately created the context for 9/11. And we have to remember the Taliban offered to hand bin Laden over if the U.S. could simply prove his role. That was their demand.
And they couldn't provide any evidence. Is any of this stuff, is this information in The Management of Savagery? Because this is some great stuff.
It's all there.
The first time. Yeah. I got to get it back up on my Kindle.
The book starts in Afghanistan. And, if you read it, if you read the first few chapters, you'll see that this is the current reality that's playing out. This is the reality that the Soviets lived through. And after 9/11, Soviet military officials who directed their counterinsurgency effort tried to warn the U.S. military of what kind of quagmire they were entering, and they were like, "No, but you're the stupid Reds. You're the commies. Like, we do things better. We build back better." And 20 years later, like what did we build 20 years later?